everybody, Zach again, newtutorial.com, coming and making a video for you today. We're going to get on to honey. I talked about this last week when we did our milk video. Again, just so many things going out there on Facebook, and I think just people are looking for things to argue about, and really they just don't need to be argued about. But I think some people, and it wasn't just this way in the Torah movement or any religious circles, any time people discuss and talk about the Bible, they want to debate things, they want to try to show others their vast knowledge, and they even try to make up things to prove to others that they are more knowledgeable than the rest of all of us. And so you see people out there talking about the milk, you shouldn't drink milk, it's unhealthy, it's a sin even. Or you see people talking about honey. This is something that's come up in the last year or so, where people are saying that honey is not kosher. It comes from an insect. It's bee vomit. The bee takes in the pollen and swallows it up and then vomits it back up, and then you have honey. And so what you're really eating is bee vomit, and therefore it's not kosher. There's no way it could be kosher, and this is absolutely a bunch of garbage. And again, you come to the point where you just why? Just why? First off, let's start with bee vomit. It's not vomit. If just a simple search on the anatomy and the health of all creatures, an animal or a creature or any type of creeping thing only vomits when the body is sick, because see, that's the body's defense mechanism, if you will, to get rid of something that's harming it. If you ingest a poison, or if you ingest something that does not sit well with your body, this is something that your body's defenses have built inside of it. Part of the amazing creation our Father has created us with, and all of his creatures with, is that your body repulses it by vomiting it up. Okay, it's basically what happens when you're sick. You ingest something that's not good, your body says, oh no, and goes, bleh, and all over, it's gone. Okay, the body repulses it out of your body. It's something natural, it's built in, it's a defense mechanism of your body. So what you're saying is, if honey is bee vomit, and we know that bees make honey all the time, okay, that's what they do 24/7. You're saying that a bee is sick 24/7. Let that sink in for a second. You're saying that a bee is always sick. It's ridiculous. The bee is not always sick. It doesn't spend its entire life, in the hive sick. It's just crazy. No. In fact, if you do the research, a bee has two stomachs. One stomach it is used for energy, that it takes in food and then it excretes it out as waste. And then the other is, for this one purpose of creating the honey, mixing it with the enzymes that is in that tiny sac inside of its body, and then it uses that to make the honey. It's ridiculous. And again, there are just people out there who just want to start trouble. They want to stir the pot. They're just looking for an audience, a way to gather people to them and to proclaim their vast knowledge to others. Guys, bees are not sick, okay? Bees are very healthy, and they're making something that the Bible speaks of 56 times. 56 times. Now let's get to some of these objections in the actual text. If we go over to Judges, the first one we're going to talk about here is Judges 14. We see in Judges 14, verse 8, it says, after a time he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees, and the honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took a swarm of bees. So we know this is bees, right? I mean, there's no question about this. This is bees, okay? And there's honey in the carcass. And he took thereof in his hands and went on eating, and came to his father and his mother and gave them, and they did eat. But he told them not that he had taken it out of the honey out of the carcass of the lion. And the objection here by some of these people who are saying that honey is unclean is that Samson was not living a righteous life, and this is in fact honey, and he is eating it, and they're just another reason to show you that Samson is just a horrible person, and he's eating honey, and he shouldn't be eating honey, bees of honey, it's unclean. He's eating it, and he even gives some to his parents. However, we know from the chapter before that his parents were righteous, because every single time I can find in Scripture where an angel appears to you and opens your womb, gives you the blessing of a child, that happens to people who are righteous. I open your womb, boom, you have a child, and we know that Samson's parents followed all the instructions that the angel in chapter 13 gives to them. They were righteous, and they ate the honey. It was honey from bees, okay, from a honeycomb. they were righteous and they did eat the honey. That should be the nail in the coffin right there. End of story. Stop. But people still have objections. I think that's a ridiculous argument. I mean, that should put it completely to rest. There are other objections, though. Let's go ahead and take a look at the incident with Jonathan. So we know from 1 Samuel 14:25, let's start there. And it says, "And all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey upon the ground. And when the people were come unto the wood, behold, the honey dropped, but no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath." And this is talking about the oath of Jonathan and his father. And we know that Jonathan, he puts his staff into the ground, and then he eats of the honey. And everyone has, the rest of the story from there on. But people will say, "Zach, that wasn't real honey. That was tree sap." Well, you're talking to someone who has taken tree sap, maple sap, out of maple trees here on this homestead, and I have spent the hours upon hours upon hours upon hours upon hours boiling it down to get actual syrup. It takes a long time. Folks, you can't take tree sap. It's not sweet at all. It's water. If you go out, it's January right now, or February, just turned February. But between January and February, a lot of times people will tap maple trees and they will pull the water. It's called water, maple water. They call it maple water around here, but it's just tree sap. If you take that, you put it in a glass after it comes out of the tree and you drink it, it tastes like really good water. There's very hardly any sweetness. In fact, to get a tinge of sweetness, you have to boil it at least for a little while. Makes great coffee. If you put that water in your coffee maker, makes great coffee, but it's not sweet. You have to boil it and boil it and boil it and boil it for hours. It's an all-day process. In fact, usually when you're making maple syrup, you're working late into the evening because it's a very long process to get the sweetness. In fact, it takes for sugar maples, it takes 40 gallons of sap to get just 1 gallon of syrup. Did you know that? 40 gallons. To get one. Now, for soft maples and silver maples, red maples, and even other types of trees, it takes even more. Okay? So you're talking about even longer boiling time to get the sugar out. Just for a sugar maple, it takes 40 gallons for 1 gallon of syrup. That's ridiculous. The folks, here's the deal. Bees, in their natural environment, live in trees. So it makes perfect sense that they came to the forest and they saw honey coming out of the tree and coming onto the ground. Because I don't know if you've ever been in a forest. I'm in the forest all the time. The winds are always coming and it bends the trees. And as it bends the trees, it breaks the comb, and then the honey leaks out of the comb and onto the ground. Most bees will live in trees. Sometimes they live in rocks and sides of cliffs and things like that. There's lots of examples of that, but most of the time they're living in forest in a hollowed out tree. And as the wind moves the tree, it breaks the comb, and the comb releases its honey over the tree and onto the ground. It's that simple. But see, some of you people just have to get in the woods once in a while and see this stuff for yourself. I have come across trees in the woods with bees in them. In fact, when we moved here, no one in my area that I know of had bees, and I can't see it in my neighbors. So finally we have one neighbor who does have their own bees, but before that, our persimmon trees have little flowers on them every year, and they're just swarming with bees. Where do you think those bees come from? Because nowhere else in my area do I know of anybody. I know all my neighbors. Nobody has hives, except for now that one guy. But that was before he moved here. Where do you think the bees were coming from? They live in the trees. They find hollowed out trees, and that's where they make their hives every year. And then in the springtime, they split and they swarm and they search out new trees. That's the way it is. In fact, it's not. If you go out and spend some time in the woods, you can oftentimes, if you spend enough time, you can find hives in trees if you know what you're looking for. In fact, the American Indian used to do that, the same thing. That's how they would track down hives. They would send out guys and they would chase bees and run as fast as they could fly as best they could and track down where the hives were in the forest. It's ridiculous. But see, so many of us are so disconnected from the agricultural roots of the Hebrew people. That's why I hype on this so much, because we're so disconnected. And so when someone comes online and says, "Oh, honey is bee vomit," and what they're really talking about here is tree sap, people buy into it because they've never been out of their apartment complex. It's frustrating. And, sometimes I allow that frustration to appear on camera. But, it's okay. We need to relearn these things. We need to and that's one of the reasons I do the Homestead channel. We need to relearn these things so that we can better understand our scriptures, because you're never going to understand your scriptures unless you just for a second attempt to live out the lifestyle that these people lived. And for some of us, that means getting out of our apartment complex, our subdivisions, going out to the woods and seeing what there is to see in our Father's wonderful creation. Absolute ridiculous. Bees do not produce bee vomit. They produce honey, and it is good. All right, we'll leave it at that. Go home, read your Bible. Thanks.